Welcome to the Rise and Wander podcast, where we'll explore adventure, spirituality, and empowerment through the outdoors and beyond. Join me, Carla Amador, as we focus on topics around the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional benefits derived through the outdoors. You'll also hear inspiring stories, get educated, and more. Let's get started. Are you ready to take a life-changing journey? Join me for a hike per week or 52 hikes within a year at 52hikechallenge.com. Gain the physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional benefits derived through the outdoors. You'll also gain access to community, education, resources, and more. Plus, get 10% off on your sign up and first order with code RISE25. That's RISE25. See you on the trails. Hey friends, getting outside and hiking changed my life back in 2014. Now I want to share an even bigger adventure with you all. This October 2026, I will be leading a small group to Nepal to trek the iconic Annapurna circuit. Join me on a powerful journey through the Himalayas that challenges your body, expands your mind, and connects you deeply with nature and each other. This is more than a trip, it's a milestone. And if trekking Nepal has ever been on your bucket list, I would love for you to join us. Spots are limited, and you can learn more on our website at 52hikechallenge.com. Click on the Events and Trips tab, and then Adventure Trips with 52 to learn more. Welcome to the Rise and Wander podcast. My name is Carla Amador, and I'm your host. I'm really thrilled to share that today we have a special guest, Dr. Rob Scanlon. Dr. Rob is a certified pulmonary medical and critical care doctor and currently in practice. And he has over 20 years of experience. And when he's not at work, he's out hiking. He wrote a book called Surviving the Trail: 5 Essential Skills to Prepare Every Hiker for Adventure's Most Common Perils. I recently came across his work and I thought, we're talking all about hiking basics in this series. And I thought, who better to have on the show than Dr. Rob to talk about common mistakes and how you can avoid them on the trail. As you all know, running a worldwide hiking movement, one of our top priorities is ensuring safety outside. I think one of the key things we teach is turn around if you need to. The mountain is always going to be there. You want to hike another day. So this is so perfect for this series, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for being on the show, Dr. Rob.
Thanks so much for having me on, Carla.
I have so many questions, and I will just jump right on in. So first and foremost, were you a hiker prior to you practicing? Because I was reading in your book about you using it as a way to de-stress. But
Yes.
kind of give me a little history about how you started in the outdoors. And
Way back when I was a kid, I was in the Scouts and such. But at that time in life, I didn't really truly appreciate it because life wasn't terribly stressful at that point in my life. And so when I went out into practice in 2002 was when I started hiking with a group from the hospital, as you said, to de-stress from what we did Monday through Friday. And that's when I learned to appreciate the challenges, the silence, the escape that hiking offers.
I love that. And I just want to start off this podcast with that story because it is such a great way to manage life stresses. I was on a walk today with a neurologist, and she was talking all about how being outside really helps the brain. And we talk about the walking meditation, and she'll be a guest at some point. But yeah, it's just so important to have tools. And I'm so glad that you found this as one of the things that you use to help you, because I'm sure your job is extremely stressful. And we all need healthy ways to deal with those life stresses. And I'm sure as a doctor, I'm sure you prescribe nature to your patients, I'm guessing.
All the time.
Yeah. I was able to review the book and go through and read some of it. And what I really loved was when you start introducing the importance of preparation when it comes to getting outdoors. There were so many little nuggets in there that I could talk about, but I'm going to let you lead here. And I think starting off with people who are new and what tips you have for them as they're getting started. And let's talk a little bit about that preparation and that importance.
Yeah, sure. Certainly at the very beginning of anything you do, whether it's, hey, I want to do competitive cycling, or I want to start getting into running or something. So the surface level knowledge is from coming from the outside in, it looks pretty much as far as hiking goes, it looks like walking, just be outside. Cool. And then you start scratching the surface and then you discover way more. And again, in any endeavor that you try to get into. So a lot of people approach it as, hey, I'm taking a walk around the block a few times or down the road a few miles, whatever. I'll just do it out there and come equally as prepared. And this is an intrinsically dangerous place. And I mean, if you just hang out at the trailhead for a little while, just watch. And before you get on, just look at people and what they're bringing on trail and such, and of all ages, and maybe of varying levels of experience coming on trail. We don't know how long they're going to be out there. Are they going to go a quarter mile? Are they planning on going 5 miles? We don't know. But a lot of people get on trail with just foot coverings and nothing else. And so really not realizing that they could get caught in one of these very common traps that we always see on the headlines if you're paying attention. And especially for the novice, but even for the more experienced hiker, this book really applies because we don't know what we don't know. And if we have the humility to just look into, all right, how do I do this and absolutely make sure that I can do everything that I can do to make it back to the trailhead, what does that entail? And looking at it in a vacuum is daunting because people are focused on maybe the wrong things. A lot of people text me on the side, like, what about bears? What about rattlesnakes? And so we tend to see those headlines a lot more common than we do just the dehydrated hiker being rescued and such. And it gets overemphasized, I think, and the animal interactions are actually quite rare.
Yeah.
But so that gets over sensationalized, but the other stuff gets a little suppressed from just a media attention standpoint. We don't get a full appreciation of what we really need to do. So the book, I really wanted to focus on what are the things that we can control and commonly happen that kill hikers or require them to be rescued. And so that's really what I kind of decanted it down to these 5 core things to really focus on. So it makes it coming from a vast body of knowledge, or shoot, what do I got to do to get myself prepared for this? And brings it down to its bare necessities. And like I said, there's a ton of information nuggets in there within those 5 skills, but really just helps focus people on that.
Yeah, for sure. And I wrote down the ones I wanted to mainly focus on today because we cater a lot more to your beginner hiker. There are a lot of people as well that are experienced, and I would love to touch on, but let's get started with the top perils that you have listed in the book.
So there's 6 common things. The 6 things that most commonly the hikers die or need rescue from are dehydration, hypothermia, heat illness, which is heat exhaustion, heat stroke, drowning, falling, and getting lost. And so the 5 skills came to hydration strategy. Number 2, maintenance of body temperature. So that covers hypothermia and heat illness. Falling, like awareness of heights and falling risk. Crossing mountain streams and interaction with water to mitigate drowning risk. And land navigation. So those 5 being the 5 skills that we really focus in on.
Yeah, I loved everything that I got to see in the book. And as an experienced hiker, I have experience with a lot of tools and tips with a lot of the information that you had in there. One of the things we talk about it, but it's hard to teach is the navigation portion of it because I've taken courses many times. And if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important, though, for anyone listening that doesn't understand navigation. It is explained in the book and it has a really solid, like a step-by-step guide. So I would highly recommend that you check it out and that you buy yourself a compass and you get familiar with how to use it. That is one of the 10 essentials. And navigation and knowing where you are, being able to read a map, understanding a topo map. We could go on and on about that subject, but I'm going to table it because I want to get into water. Like one of the things that you talk about is the aspect of being dehydrated. That is such a common issue because I talk to SAR. I'm on the pages sometimes and I see hiker rescued, dehydrated. Let's just talk about that importance of being mindful about water and tips you have for new hikers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so I think most people grasp the concept, I should bring water, and most references do say bring water. But the open-ended question is, nobody, until this book came out, nobody actually gave a guide for somebody to actually be able to guesstimate how much water am I going to have to bring? What am I going to have to consume along this 5 mile, 8 mile, 2 mile trek? And so I really wanted it to make a big difference in that regard because you really can't impact the next person who's going to get rescued from Camelback Mountain for heat stroke if I just say bring water. And so a lot of people, again, from the trailhead observation standpoint, you might see people getting on trail with a 12-ounce or 16-ounce store-bought bottle. And if they're planning on that 5, 6 mile hike, good luck to you on the last 4 miles of that hike, depending on the conditions and everything else. So you haven't brought enough. But so I really wanted to make sure that people had a guide as far as what to bring, to what to expect, get a decent idea of what they would need, and so that it would apply to all hikes basically. And it takes into account 4 major determinants of our hydration needs, which is average hiking pace, elevation gain, temperature, outside temperature, and humidity. So the faster we go, the hotter it is, the higher the elevation gain, and the lower the humidity, the higher our hydration needs are, which makes Camelback Mountain a very common place to be rescued for dehydration and heat illness. And those two go hand in hand. So if we can look on, say, all trails or look at weather apps and things like that and figure out how fast of a hiker am I and get these conditions, elevation gain, et cetera, and it's very easy to determine, then plug it into the table in the book and you have how much per hour are you going to need on average. And then you just multiply your hiking speed times the number of hours that you're going to be hiking, or do the math and figure out how many hours you're going to be out and just do that multiplication. And it's very easy to do. And so I wanted to make it user-friendly and useful.
I love that. There's a couple of equations that I remember when I took a course with the Sierra Club that we had to do. And so I haven't heard one for water. I typically go with the rule of thumb of depending on temperature, and mainly temperature is what I focus on, is a minimum of a liter for every 3 miles, and that's in mild temperatures. Of course, that does not apply to desert hiking. That's just like a starting point. I lived in California and I was born and raised there. And one of the top hikes, Griffith Park, you'd see all kinds of hikers and people walking the trail with nothing but like a small little water bottle. And it was a hot day, and I just would be like, that's a disaster waiting to happen. It's not just there. I'm constantly seeing people walking with none of the 10 essentials. And granted, I understand not everyone knows this.
Exactly.
I totally get that. And the thing you hope is that like they don't get into trouble. And of course, I've also at times helped people and I see they're dehydrated and I've given them electrolytes. But of course, the whole point of today is to continue to spread the word that, hey, you really need to make sure that you bring plenty of water. Do the research. That's why the planning, the prep is so important. Do the research to find out what the temperature is going to be, what the mileage is going to be. Don't just show up at the trailhead and then try to figure it out as you go, because you're now putting yourself at risk. What if you get lost? One of the things that I loved in the book was the halfway water point, turning around. I actually have a quote here. So no matter how long you've planned for, when you've consumed half of the water you've taken, the hike is over. And I think just like being mindful of that and checking on your water supply is really important, because the last thing you want to do is be hiking up to Cucamonga Peak and then you get to the summit and you're like, oh, I'm out of water, and you have no backup. And now you still have to hike down 4 or 5 miles, whatever it is. It's been a long time since I've hiked it, but get down to the car. And now you don't have any water. Another tip that I love with that is leaving extra water in my car. Because sometimes when I first started out, I just bring my water with me that I'd have. And then what if there's an emergency and I don't have any water in the car? And now I'm like double trouble. Any other things you want to add to that when it comes to people planning water?
Yeah, I always say no matter what you use to estimate what your water needs, bring more. Because you might come across, you'll maybe be hiking with somebody who didn't come with enough, or you come across somebody who really needs it. And of course, that requires a little bit of internal empathy for somebody else to be able to look out for that and to provide that. And so to always expect, because you may get lost temporarily, which means you're spending that much more time out there amongst those elements, and your hydration needs will be extended. So not only for somebody else, but for yourself too. And and so that's the only tip I can come up with off the top of my head.
It's a really good one, though. Absolutely agree with you. Always bring extra water. Yes, it's going to be a little bit heavier. If there was a need for it, you'll be grateful that you have it rather than regretting, like, oh, I knew better. Thank you for that. The other thing I really wanted to touch on, it's in the same bucket of things that are really important to think about, which is heat stroke and heat exhaustion. And I just wanted to like offer you this opportunity to talk about it, because of course we talk about it and we go, watch out for these symptoms. But I really want to just hear it from you and give people the background on why it's so dangerous, what people can do to prevent it, and then have you talk a little bit about the symptoms.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for hypothermia, but heat illness, the beginnings of it is very subtle and often missed. And so the first signs are the thought process is not quite as sharp, performance not quite as sharp, that person's fallen behind. Maybe they're solo and you don't have that compared to, but you may compare that to what your expected performance would be. And that might be all you experience until you start losing altitude, so to speak, until you really start getting into it. And so then you start to look, if you happen to urinate along the way, your urine becomes much more colorful. It goes from, if you're well hydrated, it looks just slightly yellow, but if it's getting yellow and turning amber, that starts to give you signs that I need to hydrate that body more. Dry mouth, you stop creating saliva. You start to, as your body heat increases, you're sweating beyond your norm, because the body uses sweat to the evaporation from that to shed heat. And so in that moderate stage, then you're sweating more than you would ordinarily sweat. The problem is you're losing a lot of water with that sweat too. So at some point when you're going from moderate to severe, you stop sweating, because the body says, we can't afford to lose any more water. We got to conserve, and you stop creating urine. And so then once that starts happening, there's very little that can turn that around in the field, because then the person starts getting sick to their stomach, they start vomiting, losing their orientation and such, and you don't want to have somebody guzzling water when they're not oriented, they're lethargic, you're vomiting. Once you get to that excessive sweating, decrease urine production phase, you're already in moderate dehydration, heat illness. Call 911, call for rescue, because it ain't going to turn out well. And if you wait any longer, it's just going to get worse, and that person gets closer to a death.
Absolutely. Yeah, some of the things that I think are really important and you talk about is the prehydration. If you know you're going to be out, or if you are hiking somewhere where it's the desert, let's just say the Grand Canyon is a typical place where people hike and then they don't realize what's happening. they get into trouble, have to be rescued. Really understanding what you're getting yourself into. And there are other things that you can do. Like I really love talking about, I think it's called Kafka's cool tie, for example,
Right.
making sure you have the right proper gear on. Just there's ways and things you can do to prevent. And that's that whole, again, going back to being prepared
Right.
and knowing what signs to look out for, which Dr. Rob was just sharing with you all. And then if you get into a situation where maybe you come across someone on the trail, even knowing what to look out for is really important. Then that brings me to hypothermia because unfortunately, along with altitude sickness, I've heard of stories of people when they get to that state where they're confused and they're on top of a mountain, that's where accidents like falls happen. You
Yeah.
don't want to even get to that point, but can you tell us a little bit more about what they should look out for with hypothermia and what they should do should they encounter a situation where someone is going into that state?
And I'll start it with recently, I think January, February of this year, I think we all probably saw the news report of this couple who was hiking up in Austria, I think it was one of their highest peaks in Austria. And I think it was 3 in the morning. They were still trying to head to the summit. She had to just sit down and just be there. And he left her. He went back down to the base and even walked past the rangers. That's a whole other aspect of it. But she was clearly not able to go forward, which means she was definitely deep in the hypothermic state. And so they both missed or ignored or tried to override the earlier signs of hypothermia,
Yeah.
which again goes back to the thought process not being quite as sharp, the physical abilities not being quite as standard for what you'd expect. And then certainly when we're doing a lot of hiking upward, we have a tendency to sweat. And so we're bundled up
Yeah.
to protect ourselves from the cold and keep the heat in. But there's that really fine balance where you could have done such a good job at that, where you sealed in the heat and the sweat that's coming off your body. And that's even a further issue with hypothermia. But once that shivering begins, then that is a clear-cut sign things are going in the wrong direction. And so the
Yeah.
shivering is just this muscle in a uncontrollable muscle activity at a very rough pace and amplitude that your body is just trying to create heat through whatever means it can. And very much like the sweating parallel to the heat injury, once the shivering stops, much like the sweating stops, the body's trying to conserve that little bit of glycogen it's got left for just trying to preserve the heartbeat at that point. And again, so once the shivering starts, kind of again, go back to the heat injury, once the sweating is excessive, that's the time to say, all right, let's turn around or call for rescue. Once that shivering starts, turn around or call for rescue, depending on how far you are from the trailhead, et cetera. And so take home point is, and it's all laid out in the book, early signs, the later signs, but the trick is capturing it at its early stages, trying to intervene at the very early stages. So if, let's say, you're in early hypothermia, you're not performing well, your head's not right, eat.
Okay.
So that will give your body substrate to burn calories with. You may want to increase your pace to create more body heat. You may want to add another layer if you're not sweating underneath, that kind of thing, just to seal in the heat. But if you're getting further past that point or that's not working, you need to listen to your gut and turn around and not let anybody shame you
Yeah.
out of turning around. And that's what may have happened in Austria. The boyfriend of the couple may have shamed her out of turning around. Women are much better than men at seeing the forest from the trees and not so fixated on the summit or nothing at all type of mindset. And so she may have been shamed out of that and pulled beyond her capacity to continue. And that's probably what got them into trouble.
Yeah.
Just conjecture, but that's
Yeah.
that's my amateur's take on that.
I think it's a really important thing to add to that, that if you ever have a gut feel or something doesn't feel right, stop and really take some time to sit with Should I continue? Sometimes I truly believe there are reasons why something doesn't feel right. And so I think that's important. I do truly believe, especially when it comes to mountaineering activities, you hear it more in mountaineering versus hiking, but it still applies. You need to be responsible for yourself. You may be with a group or others, but this is your life that we're talking about. I've trained and taken courses in mountaineering before. And so I think being prepared for yourself, having the tools for yourself. That's why it's so important to have some form of navigating. Even if you're with a group that they're supposed to be a leader, you don't know what could happen on the trip. Leaders get lost too. It doesn't mean that they're not going to make a wrong turn and you're following them. And then you come and realize, oh, wow, we've gone 2, 3 miles off trail. Had you been prepared, had you taken the steps, you could have pointed out, hey, do we want to double check that? There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I used to do a lot more hiking peaks and stuff of that sort. Every time I would rely on someone else, I would usually regret it. There was always it was a lesson that was consistent. Even now, I still stop at every intersection and think to myself, let me just triple check myself. And I think that's important. If we're going to do any of these activities that there is some risk, you need to take it seriously. I read the statistics, which I actually wanted you to share with everyone, that there's about 10,000 rescues every year. I would love for you to share some of the statistics with the audience, because I was blown away by some of the stuff I was reading in terms of what happens when people are unfortunately needing support.
Yeah, unfortunately, at least the national headlines really just scratch the surface. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And so in an average week in the US and Canada, about 10 hikers die. And another 200 need rescue. So that's about 500 deaths and 10,000 rescues a year. Vast majority of them being from this set of variables that we can control and we can choose to control or choose not to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pride amongst anything. There's a lot of people with more pride than talent or practicality, what have you. And that's where people really get caught up, as when the ego supersedes that will to live. And I think when push comes to shove, when we know in our heart, I could seriously die here, right now. This is my last day. Then that instinct to live kicks in. So we all have it.
Yeah.
The trick is becoming in tune with your will to live before you get into that situation, and do those simple things. If we can control the vast majority of things that happen out there that make those headlines, all you got to do is be in touch with, I could die if I don't do it right, or need rescue. And then now these days, people are getting actually the bill for that. And it's starting to happen more and more. It's about 15,000 a rescue. So that can have serious implications.
Yeah.
And let me do the simple stuff. It's totally easy. Yes, the land navigation requires a little bit of understanding of compasses and maps and that kind of thing. But if you're not a natural navigator, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit, but if you're not a natural navigator, then go with somebody who is. And then you can share your talents, your skill sets. Or if you go with 3 people, then you got a skill set of 3 instead of a skill set of 1. Calling upon others to really help augment your ability to get back in one piece, because we all want to get back in one piece. When push comes to shove, whether people realize it or not, or want to be proactive about it, is a whole other situation.
Absolutely. Let's get into falls, because I loved, and I wrote down the fatal selfie. I do think it's unfortunate that we see these headlines, and it's also important time to bring awareness to this common situation that sometimes people find themselves in.
Yeah, the stats that's in the book, the stats were pretty steady. I think it was until like the late 2000 teens, like 17, 18, whatever. And then a lot of hiking stuff came on board on social media, and the death by selfie rate rose quite a bit, actually. And yeah, and unfortunately, people do some daring poses for that
Mhm.
affirmation on social media. When you do the same picture from 4 feet from the cliff's edge and be in a much safer situation. When you're getting that selfie, you're totally off balance with your hand up and you're looking up and everything else, and you don't really have your all of your bearings. And I don't know about you, but when got up to Angel's Landing, it was just a tad disorienting. I felt a little wobbly, and I don't know if I've got a little history with heights, so I don't know if that's just me or if everybody's a little off kilter, even though you're on solid ground, but it's just
Yeah.
elevated, and it's just not quite the same as when you're on terra firma on the ground. And so then add that lack of balance with the selfies and all that stuff, and back up for a better view or have you, bad things happen. And
Mm.
honestly, I haven't seen as many headlines as far as that's
Yeah.
concerned in the last couple of years. And I don't know if people are catching on or if it's been played out already. I don't know. But hopefully that is truly dying down.
I agree. Yeah, it is really sad. I have seen the headlines as well, but yeah, pay attention. It's not worth your life. Personally, I don't love looking, yeah, down some crazy steep cliff, not my thing. I also feel a little uneasy. To me, it's not worth it. So typically I'm the person that, like you said, I'm like 4 feet. And then I'm always like with my friends and family, hey, not too close to the edge, okay? When you see kids sometimes, I mean, that freaks me out. If you actually have a fall, whether you trip over a rock or you slip and fall. Now we're getting into injuries that could possibly happen, and we don't want that for you. So the best thing you can do is pay attention. And of course, like you said, a lot of these things are preventable, but I will say that I do think the use of phones sometimes we can be out there and maybe taking photos. Try your best to maybe stop and take the photo rather than be walking with your phone, or like you said, you get to a cliff. The last thing you could have an accident. I mean, things happen.
A little chipmunk starts eating at your ankle and whatever.
Exactly. Mindfulness. Be mindful. The picture is not worth a potential fall or injury in the grand scheme of life. So let's just jump into water crossings, river crossings, that kind of a thing. I'd love for you to just share your wisdom on that because you never know.
So it might not be after this past winter, depending on where, but typical winters, you get a lot of snowfall in the higher peaks. And so as the spring comes in, that's starting to melt and
Yeah.
gravity. We don't usually think too much of a body of water called a creek or stream. It just sounds so undangerous. Come on, what, 2 inches of water, please? It's a puddle. But these creeks and streams can be several feet deep and just like Colorado Rapids, and so very easily can just sweep us right over. That stuff can turn boulders and knock down trees, etc. So it's a tremendous amount of hydraulic force. So pushing us off of our balance is really a nothing thing for those. These tend to be the worst from spring till about midsummer. From midsummer, all that snow is mostly melted and such, and then and into the fall, they're the most tame. And then during the day, so if you happen to be hiking in early June, where there's a lot of snow melt still happening, earliest in the day is when the temperatures are coldest and the least
Mhm.
amount of snow melt is running down. So it's the safest time in a particular day that one can cross. The afternoons, 1 to 3 p.m. being like the worst time ever in the day to cross. So there's a lot of little factors in there, and knowing the trail ahead of time is definitely an important part of approaching these crossings. And if you see that the trail runs across, and you may not be able to tell. I did a backpacking trip with my buddies in Banff National Park in September of 24. And actually, the picture on the cover of the book is from that very trip. So I just hung back and I was like, oh my God, this is a gorgeous view. And so two of my buddies that we're actually going back to Canada to backpack in June of this year. So that's those two guys up there. But yeah, so there's a lot of crossings in the route that we picked. It was a big loop. And so there's a lot of crossings, and the park did a great job as far as having something to step on over these
Yeah.
waterways, but you don't know what's on the
Yeah.
ground. That's the problem. until so we got to I think it was the third night, and there was a big river that went by the campsite, and so we had to cross the next morning to go forward in the loop. There was nothing. This is the biggest, widest stretch of like crazy water running and everything else, and nothing was built there.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Like they had this little like three centimeter like babbling brook, and they had like a log going across, and but this huge river that was it was about mid thigh deep when things got to it, and so it was sketchy to cross to begin with.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't go above your knees, but we were already committed, so that I knew it was either gonna go well or gonna go horribly wrong.
Oh no.
And thank God it went well.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so the unfortunate part is that if you're on especially a backpacking trip where turning around may not be an option, and not knowing, you see it on the map that it crosses the water, but you don't see on the map that it's got anything to help you get across. That becomes really difficult.
Yeah.
And that's what really threw us off in that point. We crossed first thing in the morning, and
Yeah.
but it was just way deep, and yeah, and we were just shocked that there was
Yeah.
nothing to help hikers get across that path.
Yeah, spoiler alert on that. If you have a big pack on, or even could be even your regular backpack, you're supposed to completely make sure you unbuckle anything. And if it happens that you fall, you need to let that pack go. I know that sounds probably terrifying, but just a little side note. And I know that's also in the book. I saw that in there, the importance of that. I don't know, that's like commonly spread information. Another thing, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, using your trekking pole to measure like how deep the water is. Although, as you said, there could be slippery rock. There's so many variables. And I remember the only time I've really experienced this was on the John Muir Trail. You just reminded me of this one time we got to this one spot and we had to cross a big river. And thankfully everything was fine. We didn't, but we always made sure that we took everything off, took our shoes off. We had extra sandals, so we would put on we had Tevas on. That was just
Right.
easier for us with the straps. So we would put that on as we would cross. And then, but it was interesting. And thankfully, we did go during a time that it wasn't a high water season with the rivers and all of that. Because there are some times where that could be really dangerous.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
prepare, do your research, know what to do if that goes with flora and fauna. Even though, like you said, that's the most commonly the thing that people fear. What if I come across an animal? Yeah, great. That could be a possibility. It's probably not super likely, but if it does happen, what do I do? You need to
Right.
research.
Thankfully, there's a little mutual fear with animal interactions or wildlife interactions. So at least you got that going for you. If you keep your distance and approach it in a non-threatening manner, you're likely to get away with it. But yes,
So,
and so the one thing it's in the book too, but the straits, so the straight rivers, the straight
mhm.
streams and creeks and all that stuff, the deepest part is dead center. When you have a straight on river and you're crossing, the center is the deepest part. But the one we did in Banff was a half moon curve. And so we were approaching from the inside of the curve, if you see it as a half moon. And so we were approaching from the inside curve, but it
Oh,
is the
wow.
outer part of the curve that is the deepest section. I guess with centrifugal force, it tends to go out there and just take away most of that outer part. And so when I first got in, I was like, not bad, not bad. I was like,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it was definitely getting into some sensitive areas there. I was like, oh my God, this is really high. But yeah, so it can get very sketchy. And
Absolutely.
this was, again, September. So this was shudder to think what that might have looked like 3 months before. But thankfully, we did all right.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah.
I read your story about Kilimanjaro, and I had a similar situation where we were soaked. We had so much rain, and we got to summit day the night before, or that day of, because you summit, like you get up early. That it's like such a strange thing because you get there
It's
around noon, but then you're summiting, you're going to get up at like midnight or 11 p.m. that same day and try your summit. But
right.
everything was soaked for most of us. It was
Uh,
somehow, by the grace of God or the universe, we had a little spot of sun that came up, and everyone was like frantically putting their clothes out. And even though everyone had gear, like a lot of our gear failed, and it was a common theme. And
yeah.
so I read your story of how you also had a situation where you were trying to climb Mount Kilimanjaro and then you had a mild case of hypothermia.
I was definitely getting to that approach. It sounds like we had the identical
It was
day.
so,
When did you do it? We might have been on the same trail.
that would have been funny. We did it February of 2024.
February 24. I'm thinking it was the same time.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was, and even the day we woke up, it was like the summit day was, there was like this crazy foggy, snowy, slushy. It was intense. And I definitely got to the point where I ended up taking out my emergency blanket and putting it on as another layer because my clothes had, unfortunately, it was already somewhat wet. And then now we're trying to
Right.
summit and
Oh my God.
everything was fine. I never got to the point where I was shivering, but I just had that insight like, you know what, just to be extra safe and give myself some extra protection, I'm going to put the emergency poncho on, or it was the silver mylar like kind
Right,
of
right.
bag like thing, and then a
Hmm.
girlfriend ended up giving me an extra poncho, so that really helped. But what an experience. I was just reading it and I was like, is this the same story? This is crazy.
We could have been on the same schedule. I
Same
mean, there's a
time
lot of
frame.
other tours that were going
Yeah.
at the same time. That would
Yeah.
be very funny if we were there at the same time.
Life is full of surprises. On that note, we didn't talk too much about navigation. Like I said, it's such a difficult subject, I think, to grasp if you're not really sitting with the information. But I just want to give you the ability to share any insight or tips that you might with the audience before
Yeah,
we start
yeah.
wrapping up.
Yeah, so I guess I was alluding to before, there are natural navigators and naturally bad navigators. And there's a big scientific explanation for it. It's in the book, and there was actually a Nobel Prize for physiology and medicine awarded in 2014 for the discovery of why. And it's actually how our brain is wired. And so you either got it or you don't. But it can be developed, it can be acquired by those who are just not natural. It'd just be harder for them than naturally. But electronic navigation is prime time. We're in the electronic age now and everything else. We have to all acknowledge that, and I've said this before many times, the wilderness is where batteries go to die. And so unless you have a tremendous amount of backup power to keep that phone going and it doesn't fall into water or fall on a rock and your screen cracks in all different locations and breaks or whatever, then it may be adequate enough, and not 100%, but it may be adequate enough to get you through. And that's what most people choose because it's easier. It's easier to follow the little green ball or the little arrow or whatever. And if that's better than nothing, I would say. And so there's times where I use it too. And so it depends on the situation. But if I can find, and not every place has a paper map available, which is also a little bit of a problem. But if I can find a paper map, and I will bring my compass and use the analog either as a primary with the electronic as a secondary, or use the electronic as a primary with the analogs backup. But I always have that backup.
Yeah,
And again, if I don't have a paper map, then that makes map and compass a little difficult. And so it all depends on what's available out there. Certainly a lot of people are intimidated by maps and compasses, and it's really terribly simple. There's two basic types of compasses. There's the lensatic and the orienteering, and there's advantages and disadvantages to both, and they're both in the book. And certainly the land navigation courses or land navigation
hmm,
texts are huge and go through all kinds of different skills and such. For hiking, we only need 4 or 5 skills, really, and that's all we need. So we need to figure out where we're going, where we are, how to triangulate our location, and more importantly, what direction is getting back. And so as long as we can acquire that and or find out if we're like completely lost, but we know where we are, then we might be able to find where's the fastest way to go, either a road or a town or something like that, or a country store or something like that, where we can navigate to in order to get back to civilization. And so having these skills is invaluable. And so if you're one that is interested in doing that, and as you said, these skills are perishable. If you don't practice them, you lose
yeah,
them. And much like everything else, like a language or what have you, if you can practice when you're out every single time you go out, and even in your backyard, you can do it. It's
for
very
sure.
easy to do these things using the sun, using the moon if you're hiking at night, and to also to orient yourself to north, south, east, and west. And it's all in the book. But getting a better sense, and I guess a better sense of all the clues. There's
Yes.
celestial cues, there's terrestrial cues. If you're at the trailhead and a big peak in the distance, then that becomes your reference point for maybe later on, and always know where that peak is compared to where you are, so that when you're going back, it's got to be on the opposite side. Or that, that peak was always to our left when we were going up to the summit. So it's always got to be to the right when you're going back, that kind of thing.
Yes.
If you're going back and that peak's on your left, you're like, something's wrong here. Or I passed a lake on my way up. I haven't seen that lake yet.
Yeah.
And so that terrestrial cue, extremely important. So it's a lot of situational awareness, I think,
Mm-hmm.
rather than getting lost in the milieu, which is very easy when with nature and the birds and all that stuff and all the
Yeah.
lack of sounds or the little subtle sounds and all that stuff. It's great to get lost in, but not completely. And being mindful of these little cues is extraordinarily helpful in that whole navigation package. So even beyond the electronic, even beyond the map and compass, using the earth as we see on the map or from the trail is extraordinarily helpful. And just really, again, being mindful of all those things and how to use all those things to help us get to where we need to go, and more importantly, where we need to get back.
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you so much for all of that. Is there anything else any other words of wisdom or any other information before we wrap up you want to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, I think, again, I want to just restate that, if we can all do our part, and I'll try to succinctly say that our mountain rescue system is in crisis because they are
Yeah.
overworked and understaffed, and they're constantly going out and getting people, extracting them for things that the hiker could have prevented. And we are losing mountain rescuers by the day out of
Yeah.
sheer frustration. They're just quitting because it's mostly volunteer.
Yeah.
And so they volunteer to help people in need. And when you're trying to extract the person who never bothered to bring water into the desert hike, it definitely taints their sense of what they're accomplishing by volunteering. And if we all take that little bit for ourselves and prevent ourselves from being that person, then a lot of us, the majority of us, take part in that for ourselves, then we can actually preserve our mountain rescue system and preserve them for the people who truly couldn't have prevented their circumstances, and get to them in a timely manner with the right equipment and the right timing and everything else. And so we not only help ourselves, but we help others, the rescuers, and whoever's out there who maybe broke a femur and in a fall that they couldn't have prevented, that kind of thing, and they truly can't get up on their feet and run. And I think that's also part of this. I
Yeah.
wanted to just stress that, but it's not a lot of effort, and it's truly extraordinarily important. And just wanted to at least state that.
And just such a great skill. I loved how in the book you correlate all of these steps or everything that you talked about, especially the importance of preparation. You talked about it in a more logical sense of outside of hiking. You talk about being successful in life and how planning and having the steps is so important. So, like, all of this is going to help you on the trails, off the trails, but just to be responsible, be a responsible hiker, be a responsible member of society, taking care of our friends. That includes the search and rescue teams, and recognizing that when we put ourselves at danger that could have been prevented, you're not just putting yourself at danger, or you're not the only one in trouble. Now other people are going to be out there looking for you, and they equally are now at risk of something happening to them. And it's
100%.
just unfortunate. By the time this podcast comes out, I believe next week we are going to be hosting a talk about search and rescue. And Mike McKinney, who's one of our leaders, that's how I learned about you. He has, I believe, one of the leads of the Los Angeles County Search and Rescue, who's going to come on and talking all about safety awareness. So I'm really looking forward to that and learning more, and just learning how we can spread the word. And if you know someone new to hiking, teach them, talk to them, let them know about these tips. If you see someone new on the trail, you might want to talk to them and just say, hey, I noticed you didn't have a lot of water. Are you going far? I try to be as helpful as possible, of course, within reason, of course, but I'm always looking out for people. I'm always trying to be mindful and I want people to have a positive experience. And if I can help one person, then it just keeps that going. There's been times where I'm like, I'm so glad some trailheads have warning boards at the front that's like how much water you should be bringing, considerations of that. Like, I really definitely education is so important. Dr. Rob, thank you for being on and for all the wisdom. Where can listeners find out more and follow along and also get your book?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram primarily, a little bit on Facebook. I can barely handle that. And hopefully we'll have more coming up. I'm just, as we all get a little burned out on social media here and there, I'm at that point. But yeah, so the book you can pick up anywhere online from Amazon to Barnes and Noble to Books A Million and Target, Walmart, all those online sources. We're hoping to get it on the shelves at National Park Visitor Centers
Nice.
and on the shelves in books and mortar stores, but online is really king as far as getting books. But hopefully sales have been decent, and but hopefully for a approximate 65 million person hiking audience, so we've not covered everybody. So definitely pick it up, read it, and
Yeah.
if you like it, recommend it to a hiking friend because it's truly invaluable. I poured everything I
Yes.
had into this thing, and if enough people get it and pay attention to it, we will save lives. It will save lives,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
so that's really the goal of this book.
Okay. And website or what's the at?
So Dr. Rob Scanlon, so Dr_Rob Scanlon, and on Instagram. I don't have a website for that as of yet.
You have links for everything on your Instagram, I'm guessing.
So I've got an Amazon link in the
Perfect.
profile of the Surviving the Trail book. That's also the at Surviving the Trail book, and so
Perfect.
the Amazon link is in that sort of little profile blurb.
Yes.
Sorry.
And I'll make sure that I add the links in there as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. We're all good. Yeah, thank you so much. I am really grateful and thank you everyone for listening and being a part of today's episode and pass the episode along, share it with your friends, family, anyone who you know is going to be getting outside and could really benefit from this information because we want you to stay safe and we want you to keep on hiking. So, thank you Dr. Rob. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
It was a pleasure being on. Thank you so much for having me.